How we doing, guys? I'm Joe, and this is the Horrible Business Owner channel. So today we're going to discuss how to set a price. And in order to do that, we have to understand cost involved. So we're going to talk about costing your product first because I learned this lesson. If you don't understand the cost of your product, you're going to have a really hard time getting a proper price, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. I've done it, so let's try not to have you do it. So we're going to make this video today because I really believe that the first deadly sin of business is not knowing what the product is costing you. So my background's actually in ice cream. So we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to do an easy one. We're going to do a meatball sub, and then we're going to go back and we're going to do ice cream. And then later on in future videos, I will do actually understanding the difference between weight and volume so that we can get a little more in depth. But for today, we're just doing the costing part. So I have a couple of quotes that I actually like. The first one is from Warren Buffett, and he says, "The price is what you pay, the value is what you get." And this really relates to that you don't want to cheat the customer. You want them to receive value so that down the road they come back. The second quote I really like is from Catherine Payne, and she says, "The moment you make a mistake in pricing, you're cutting into your reputation or your profit." So what we're discussing here is that there is a sweet spot somewhere where you get value for your time and effort, and the customer gets value for what they've paid you for the product. And that's what we're kind of focusing on today. All right, guys, we're going to talk about my first big mistake. So my previous business experience was we had rentals, and we actually went and looked at the paper and said, hey, we've got a 4-bedroom, 1-bath. What's on the market? We went and looked at that and said, okay, we're nicer. We're not as nice as that rental. And then we set our prices, and that was fairly easy. When we started an ice cream store, I really messed up. So what we did was we went to all of the other ice cream stores within like 25 miles of us, and we wrote down what a small, a medium, a large was, and then we went back and that became our pricing. Now, the first mistake is that in ice cream, a small, a medium, and a large are different at every store. So one store is going to have 100% overrun, and a 4-ounce scoop is going to look really big, and another store is going to have 50% overrun, and a 4-ounce scoop is going to look, about 3/4 of that size, and you got the same product in both. So that's a little bit of a challenge in an ice cream store. You get a 20-ounce milkshake at one, and it's got 16 ounces of ice cream and 8 ounces of liquid, and I understand that it's more than 20 ounces because one's based on weight, one's based on volume. And then you go to another store and they've got 2 scoops of ice cream. So there's 8 ounces of ice cream and there's 16 ounces of milk. So one's thick and one's thin, and those are obviously not the same price. And I did not understand that when I started the ice cream store. What we did realize when we opened the ice cream store is that to be competitive in any market, you need to be 2 out of 3 of these things. You need to be 10% cheaper, 10% better, or 10% more convenient. In the location we had for our ice cream store, we were 10% more convenient, and we were making a product that was more than 10% better for what was available in our marketplace. So we thought that we were going to be okay, and then we just stuck with the lowest price of the ice cream stores in our area, not knowing that our product was costing us more than that. So we were not necessarily 10% cheaper. We were the cheapest in the marketplace, even though if you look at our early reviews, that is not what the clientele thought. So now we're going to cost out a meatball sub. We only sold food for 1 season, and we'll kind of discuss that later. But we're going to do a meatball sub now. So when we did it, we had 86 cents for the bun. It had 4 meatballs on it. The meatballs were 28 cents each, so you had $1.12 in meatballs. We were getting about 8 subs out of a pack of cheese, so we had 34 cents of cheese. It cost 14 cents for the boat that we put it in, and then the sauce was $15.80 for a can, and that worked out to about 80 cents per sub. And then each person that got a meatball sub averaged out at about 4 napkins. So our total cost was $3.30. And at the time that it was costing us that, we were selling the sub for $5. What we learned after the fact was that average food service has a cost of goods price of 30% in my area. So if we would have realized that there's a reason for that, that 30% would mean that we should have charged $11 for the meatball sub that we were charging $5 for, which seems a little high by my area and what people charge for meatball subs, but that gives you a general idea of how this works. So why is 30% the cost of goods standard? So 30% of the product cost or price should be cost of goods. 30% is to cover your labor expenses. 30% is to cover your operational expenses. And 10% of the product price is used for maintenance, and whatever you don't use for maintenance, that's what your actual profit is. So you can steal from one to another. So if your cost of goods is 40%, you got to get that other 10% from somewhere else in order to be profitable, which means you're either trying to cut your operational cost or your labor cost. And there's different ways of doing those things. We ended up signing a utility contract down the way that got our operational costs down a little bit, which allowed us to raise our cost of goods and still be in a profitable place. But you're only going to be able to spend 100% of what you bring in. And if you don't keep anything back, you don't have a profit to pay yourself. So we showed you how to price a meatball sub, and that's pretty straightforward. Things got way more complicated when we got into pricing ice cream. So the volume changes in manufacturing, we make our own. So you take out 3 gallons of base and you get back 5 gallons of finished product. And you would think, but the weight is really what you're working on with ice cream. So our first mistake was misunderstanding the cost of manufacture. And the second mistake was believing a pint is always a pint. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but a pint by volume is always a pint, but by weight, it changes based on how it's served. So here we are 9 years into owning an ice cream store, and I learned a lesson at about year 5 that I don't really care what size the container is. I care how much ice cream by weight is in the container. And it's going to go for the same for scoop size. It's really important to regulate your scoop size by weight, because as the ball gets bigger, it grows almost exponentially. So 2 inches of circumference in an ice cream weighs 4 times as much as 1 inch, and 4 inches of ice cream by circumference weighs 4 times what 2 inches weigh. So you're not just going up by one time with making the ball bigger, you're growing 4 times at each level that you double. So, and then we found out that a pint of hand-packed ice cream weighs roughly 1.5 times a pint of ice cream that was packaged at the machine. So since we did our calculations that a tub of ice cream that was 2.5 gallons would give us 20 pints of ice cream, what we hadn't considered is that when you're hand packing, you're squeezing all that ice cream in there, you're actually taking air out of the product, which makes you put 1.5 times the product into a pint that you would at the machine. Now, if you did all your pricing based on the fact that you're going to get 20 pints and you only get 13, you have a problem in your pricing. So here we are. My first mistake was not understanding the cost of manufacture. So I understood cost. I had sugar, egg, cream, milk, stabilizer, it all went into the pasteurizer, and my food cost was around $14 for 1 gallon of mix. The process took about 4 hours, and since I used city tap water to cool the pasteurizer before I turn on a milk chiller, I used about 80 gallons of water to make that ice cream, and I had not considered that price into the cost of goods. Then after it comes out of the pasteurizer, I process it into a final product. So I would take 3 gallons of mix, and that would be $42. We're going to add $12 worth of inclusions, which gives us about $54 in cost to make 5 gallons of ice cream. Now, that did not allot for any waste. It did not allot for any of the water usage. It did not allot for any cost of labor. So when I was sending the ice cream upstairs, I was thinking that it was costing me around $11 per gallon, and I was super wrong on that number. My second mistake was in the scoop shop. We were trying to control the size of a serving by using volume. So we had a general size that we were shooting for, and that's really hard amongst employees if they don't have something that they can look back for to make sure. So I know people put out like a baseball and they're like, we want it to be about this big, and that's fine, but nobody there wants to be the smallest scooper. So what we found was that we really had to put out a scale in order to get consistency. So when we started, 2.5 gallons of finished product was weighing around 15 pounds. That gave my certain, I had a 4 ounce as my target serving. So the average serving size was actually closer to 6 ounces when we tested the kids that were scooping. So since I did my pricing, I got about 60 scoops per container. And then when we found out what was actually going on, we realized that we were only getting about 40. And that's a big cost disparity between pricing it divided by 60 and pricing it divided by 40. So we did our pricing with what I thought it was. We're going to show you that if I made 2.5 gallon tubs at $54, that would mean that if a tub of ice cream actually cost $27, the breakdown would be 27 uh, divided by the number of scoops. So if we were getting an actual 4 ounce scoop, it'd be about 45 cents per scoop. We would have a cup involved for 14 cents, a spoon involved for 8 cents, 3 napkins at 3 cents, and that would give me a total cost of about 70 cents. So with a 30% food cost, that would mean that I would want to sell a scoop of ice cream for about $2.33. So what we found out, now that we know things, when we started up, the cost to make a tub of ice cream was closer to $45 with zero markup. So that did not allot for any markup going from manufacturing up to the scoop shop. It barely covered the water. It only covered $10 an hour in labor. So there was a big discrepancy between what we thought of the $27 and what we actually were getting cost at $45. So even targeting a 4 ounce scoop, we have found that an average serving is actually 4.85 ounces. And it's because while the kids are trying to make sure that they're scooping four by using the scale, we don't scoop off extra ice cream if we scoop too much. And if they underscoop 4 ounces, we add a little bit extra to make sure that nobody gets cheated. So if we take our 240 ounces in a tub and we divide that by the 4.85 ounces that we have for our average scoop, we're going to get about 49.5 scoops per tub of ice cream. So again, this is when we started. It's not my current cost because prices have gone up. But at $45 a tub, getting 49.5 scoops, we're at 90 cents per scoop. When you add the bowl, the spoon, the napkins, the cost of goods gets closer to $1.15, which means that our price at the time of open should have been $3.83 to meet the cost of goods of 30%. And we were, I think when we opened, we were at $2.50. So we were way below what we should have been. So at about year 5, we reached out to a local business group and said, hey guys, we're really struggling. We can't really figure out why we're not meeting what we should be doing. And we brought in a consultant for free through the business group, which was absolutely fantastic for teaching me how to actually own a restaurant style business. And the few things that we found out were that every time we sold a pint of ice cream or a large milkshake, we lost $1. It's really hard to sell your way out of a loss when you're selling it for less than what it's costing you to make it. And this gets to that point where we didn't realize that every time we hand pack a pint of ice cream, we actually used about 1.5 times a pint worth of ice cream because we squeezed the air out. And our pricing for milkshakes was based on the competitors in the area, but they were using 2 scoops of ice cream and we were using 4. So the math just didn't work because we didn't understand. It doesn't matter what they're doing as far as cost goes. It matters what we're doing. And we really messed that up. So the second year that we messed up the cost of goods after we brought in the consultant is going to be 2022. And what happened in 2022 was we did our pricing at the start of the season and we knew prices were going to go up. So we padded it just a little bit to make sure that we didn't have to raise prices over and over again. And the cost of goods just kept going up. So one week milk would go up by 10%. The next week egg yolks were up by 10%. And we actually had 9 weeks in a row from the time that we did pricing where the cost of something major in our recipe went up by over 10%. I mean, the difference between 2021 and 2022 Gummy bears went up 103%, and it was just crazy. So in 2022, we were looking at our sales as we were realizing that we really had inappropriate pricing and that we were going to lose money. We were about 3 months in, and we thought it was going to be a severe problem. We went back in the register and we calculated out the customer, and we found out that the customer was also really being squeezed by the inflation. Um, what we decided was that we would finish out 2022 knowing that we were going to take a small loss and that we would reevaluate pricing in 2023. That way, we didn't really kind of stick it to our customers during that time frame. And what we found that was that in 2023, we were actually able to open with the 2022 pricing, and we were profitable because cost of goods had gone down significantly over the largest categories of what we spent. So 2022, we did take a loss based on pricing, and that was, I guess, an intentional loss. It's not that we didn't know what we were doing. We just knew that we were trying to help the customer out a little bit. Okay, guys, that's going to give you the quick version of how to cost out your product. The next video will be next week, and we're going to talk about employment and how that was really the second thing that I really screwed up when we first started. Um, I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you on the next one.